Good morning. I'm Lori Matson, President and CEO of the Tri-City Regional Chamber. Thank you so much for joining us on day 2 of the 2021 Tri-Cities Diversity Summit. When the first Tri-Cities Diversity Summit took place 4 years ago, the intent was to create open, meaningful dialogue about issues that affect business and residents in the region. Due to the COVID pandemic, we're presenting this event virtually for the second year. And although we're not gathering in person to have these conversations with each other, our hope is that everyone who watches these sessions this week will find opportunities to have open, meaningful dialogue within their workplace and peer groups. The Tri-City Regional Chamber of Commerce values diversity and views it as a strength in our society. As a champion for the business community, we believe that creating an inclusive environment is key to the growth and sustainability of the Tri-Cities. This year's Tri-Cities Diversity Summit has featured 4 listening sessions, a keynote presentation, and the announcement of the 2021 Tri-Cities Champion of Diversity Award recipients. In a few moments, we'll turn things over to our panel for the CEO Roundtable listening session. The leaders of Greater Columbia Accountable Community of Health, HAPO Community Credit Union, NewEdge, and Carbitex will talk about the best DEI practices and their business perspectives. But before we begin, I'd like to thank the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, our premier sponsor for the Tri-Cities Diversity Summit. We greatly appreciate their partnership during the past 4 years as premier sponsor of this impactful event. HPM Corporation is a silver sponsor of the Tri-Cities Diversity Summit. Ashley Hisong, Human Resource and Accounting Manager for HPM Corporation, has provided a message for today's attendees.
Hello, I am Ashley from HPM Corporation. HPMC is going on its 10th year as the prime contractor of the Hanford Occupational Medical Services Clinic in Richland. At HPM Corporation, people are the key to our success. We produce our best results to our clients and the company when people from different backgrounds and walks of life come together as individuals to generate new ideas and new solutions. We encourage this outcome by supporting our people as individuals and encouraging them to bring their unique perspectives and life experiences to work every day. We are so proud of our diverse workforce, and we believe that promoting our employees, our business partners, and ourselves to live, learn, and embrace our culture of diversity and inclusion, that we will continue to see a positive change. It takes a very thoughtful approach for inclusion to be successful. On behalf of HPM Corporation, we encourage everyone to spend a little time each day asking yourself, what can you do to be part of the change? We are very grateful to the Chamber to provide us this platform to talk about the importance of diversity and inclusion.
Thank you, Ashley and HPM Corporation, for your silver level sponsorship of the Tri-Cities Diversity Summit, and we greatly appreciate that message. So now to our final listening session of the 2021 Tri-Cities Diversity Summit, the CEO Roundtable. Let's welcome our moderator, Carol Moser. Carol has served as Executive Director for the Greater Columbia Accountable Community of Health since 2014. She was appointed by Governor Christine Gregoire to serve on the Washington State Transportation Commission from 2006 to 2011, appointed by Governor Gary Locke to serve on the Freight Mobility Strategic Investment Board in 2000, and she was a member of the Richland City Council from 1995 to 2006, serving as the Mayor Pro Tem from 2008 to 2010. Carol is also a very active member in the MyTri 2030 Inclusion Council. Welcome, Carol. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Lori. And thank you for this opportunity to moderate the CEO Roundtable discussion. And a special thanks to the Tri-City Regional Chamber of Commerce and their sponsors for putting on the Diversity Summit. As you know, it takes a lot of courage and conviction for a community to tackle new challenges. And I'm really proud of the Chamber for adopting inclusion as an opportunity area. So my name is Carol Moser. I go by the pronoun she, her. I'd like to make a brief land acknowledgement to acknowledge the Yakima, Wanapum, Nez Perce, Colville, and Umatilla people on whose land we are living, working, and playing. Our CEOs themselves come from very diverse backgrounds and lead very diverse organizations. First of all, I'd like to welcome Dolores Breshke, President and CEO of HAPO Community Credit Union. Dolores was named CEO in April of 2020 and has served in a variety of leadership roles before becoming CEO, including Chief of Staff and Director of Strategic Management. Welcome, Dolores.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next, we welcome Pam Henderson. Pam is the CEO and founder of NewEdge, an innovation and strategy firm located in the Tri-Cities. Pam has taught at Carnegie Mellon University and has worked to commercialize over 200 early-stage technologies. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you.
Also participating today is Junice Khan. Junice is the founder and chairman of Carbitex. Founded in 2012, Carbitex is the pioneer and leader in flexible carbon fiber technology. It's also located right here in the Tri-Cities. Welcome, Junice.
Thank you, Karen.
Pam, I'd like to start our roundtable discussion with you. NewEdge worked with the Chamber to arrive at the 6 opportunity areas: prosperity, life, inclusion, agriculture, energy, and life. How did inclusion make it into the top 6? And what comments did you receive from our community that led you to recognize this particular opportunity?
Yeah, it's a great question, Carol. We had a lot of debate because one stream of thought was that inclusion and diversity belonged in every single one of these big opportunity areas, right? It makes sense that you would want that in ag, you want it in all of these different quality of life areas. But some of the survey responses were actually quite disturbing. There's an underbelly of prejudice in our community. I'm not saying it's everywhere, but there is prejudice in our community. And there's actually quite a bifurcated community. So if you looked at it on paper, you'd say, oh, look, like a really nice mix of people with, some different races and so forth. But the communities that people live in are quite homogeneous and the income levels are quite disparate. So the income level in Richland is twice what it is in Pasco. So we looked at this and we're like, this is probably the most important thing to tackle for having a healthy community. And that is to have a more inclusive and diverse, truly living diversity and inclusion. That said, we also created it as a value that ran across the other opportunity areas. So it also needed to be a value that we brought to how we build our working groups and so forth. So a real passion for saying this is where the real growth and differentiation is. If this community could step ahead and lead the way for other communities that have quite a bifurcated population, if we could really set the example for other communities of how to live in a more diverse and inclusive way, I think it would put us on the map.
Thank you for that. You're right. I mean, the Tri-Cities does have a history of exclusion. In fact, the Greater Columbia ACH just sponsored a forum a couple of weeks ago on the book, Exclusion, A History of Exclusion in the Tri-Cities. So how do all of you guys think personally about diversity? Junice, would you mind kicking us off with that question?
Sure. I think like a lot of different concepts, they can mean different things to different people. I think there's this concept of diversity in terms of, kind of proactively determining how to include more. I'm first generation from my family, born in the US. And I kind of look at things as how do you remove bias instead of how do you create inclusion? Because I think sometimes by creating inclusion, historical programs like affirmative action and other areas that, somebody is losing out in certain instances. And I think, anybody who's benefiting from, say, a program wants to make sure that they're benefiting from it, but somebody else isn't losing out. And vice versa. You don't want to be on the other end of a program in which you're getting something, even if your skill or your merit is there, you're not getting it because of something. So in terms of my perspective on diversity, obviously it's been something that, and inclusion, something that's been really top of mind more recently, but something that's been a challenge, I think, for a very, very long time, thousands of years, I would probably say, depending on civilizations. And so, again, I think as we move forward, and while this is really top of mind, it's also doing it in a way that isn't too heavy-handed. I think there's just some level of practical nature to how we can kind of go about this. And at Carbitex, it's just kind of baked into our culture We have people from different countries who are working here. We're sponsoring somebody's visa. We're in the middle of trying to do that. But we also have people who are born and raised in the Tri-Cities, right? And it's a true drive to understand what are we looking for? How do we get people who embody, our cultures around like vulnerability and empathy and, challenging convention and some of these other elements. And we tend to see that if they encompass these cultures, these values and what we stand for as a company, that what's baked into all of that is diversity and then inclusion as well.
Great. Thank you, Janice. Dolores, how do you personally think about diversity?
Well, I thought about this. Personally, I think that diversity is everything around me. It's a wide gamut or the range of differences in humanity, and that what makes each one of us uniquely different. I look at myself and my upbringing and whatnot, and I think, how do I have an opinion about diversity, to be honest? But I really do think it's about our uniqueness. There's not another person that's quite like me and vice versa. And recognizing that diversity goes beyond what we can see, and that it's oftentimes the unseen part of others and their backgrounds and their upbringing and whatnot, in which we should crave to know more about. Often our perceptions and our unconscious biases, they mislead us, and we have to be aware of that. Diversity also is what makes each one of us uniquely different than the next. It's celebrating that and trying to understand someone else's outside by not looking through my skewed vision and my perceptions, if you will. So diversity to me is really about honoring other people, respecting them, and learning from them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Pam, did you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, so I really love what Janice and Dolores, what you guys said. I love that. And I think that's really consistent for us as well, that culture is what drives things. But when I think of diversity, I'm also very passionate about looking at diversity through the lens of wealth and poverty, because I think we can get very fixated on certain types of people with certain types of, whether it's race or orientation or whatever. But one of the major drivers of personal success and success for your children and your children's children is wealth. And so when you look at a kid that comes and interviews here and they don't come from a home where there were professionals eating dinner with them every night, they are going to not have the same professional skills, right? They are going to not have the same vocabulary most likely. And so I believe that we need to do everything we can to bolster the recruiting of people from different income levels. And I think that, poverty affects, poverty or lower income or struggle to get a higher education affects 60% of the population, not, small percentages. So I'm really passionate about wealth and education as ways to even things out, because it cuts across race, gender, everything. It's a kind of a unifying force of struggling for inclusion.
I'm glad you brought that up. Sherry Atkins in the previous session talked a lot about, the importance of understanding the issues that impact your community. So we'll start with you, Pam. As a community, there's lots of issues that we can collectively address. You just mentioned a few of them. You talked about the differences between our communities. What are your thoughts about addressing more of the root causes that cause inequity, exclusion, and sameness?
Well, I have things that I could personally do, and then I have things that I think about for the community, and that, some of us have had a lot of conversations about. I mean, for me personally, with NewEdge, we're 20 people, so I can't hire hundreds of people with hundreds of different backgrounds, but we're very focused on individuality as one of the qualities. We do a lot to help people understand themselves. So we do a lot of kinds of tests and things like that to help people really understand themselves and have each other understand ourselves. So even this Friday, we have a culture moment every Friday. And this Friday, we have people introducing each other based on the other person's strengths. And so those are some of the things that we can do to make sure that there's a deeper understanding and respect. And to Janice's comment about removing bias, I think as a community, I do think we need to be very aggressive to be opening up educational opportunities as one, making sure that there's inclusion on the working groups that we have, that there's representation from different, educational groups, really supporting organizations like WSU Tri-Cities and CBC and supporting them in ways where they can then support the student populations. I mean, I learned from some of the folks at HAPO that, and some of the folks at CBC that, a lot of these kids are a $300 emergency away from dropping out of college. And that's a game changer, not for them, not just for them, but for their children and their children's children. It's generational. And so I think anything that we as businesses can do to support and keep kids in education, whether it's, university or trades, I don't care, but any form of skill building, I think is where we need to be passionate.
Dolores, I know that. Oh, Junice, did you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. Like Pam, I agree with what you just said, and just in addition to like right now, of course, diversity and inclusion are such top of mind concepts, but again, we're dealing with something that's been ingrained in us for like generations and generations, and so I think it also sometimes we tend to think that a critical mass is aware of the problem. Like, how do we fix it right away? And I think that probably leads to frustration. And also, I think it also can lead to creating programs that are really heavy-handed. But, like Pam is saying, like identifying these, the students who are a $300 crisis away from dropping out of school, like, how do you fix that? Right. Like, and when you look to remove bias, like one thing that, we talked about at a corporate level when I was talking with a different company at one point in time, and that was, don't create programs like affirmative action, but remove people's names and addresses off their resumes, because that removes bias, but doesn't put anybody else at a disadvantage. And so there are little practical things that over time in aggregate, after we're not even here, hopefully, we've at least added to the momentum of getting to more of a diverse and inclusive, world.
We too, just to tag on to what Pam had said too, credit unions we're founded on people helping people. Our mission's always been we've worked really long and hard to equitably build an inclusivity to serve our diverse membership in our communities. And so part of that, we've been doing a deep dive into research in our area to look to see where can we serve better to the underserved, or where are the areas of opportunity, like Pam is saying. And we looked really deep into Grant, Franklin, and Walla Walla counties, and realized that not only are populations continuing to grow, rents and home prices are increasing, there's multi-generational homes are becoming the norm. And so reaching into these communities for us and being able to provide them with tools, products, services to help relieve the financial and emotional burdens that can bring is really important to us. We also have recognized when we talked about the Hispanic community in our area, and providing them with the products and the benefits to help them overcome the barriers of citizenship, home overcrowding, and whatnot. And so we're really working, we've applied for some grants to really identify, like to Junice's point, some of these things that we can do that actually really help, but they aren't solving this, world hunger, as you say, but doing what we can control and have some insight into and influence on. So we believe we do that through financial inclusion, and again with a Hispanic focus. We have a mobile branch that we're able to take our banking to some of these places that there's long hours that are worked and they don't have the ability to come in and bank, and building trust and whatnot, but educating first and what's best for our members. So I'm really passionate about that and really excited about what's coming in the next year or so forward in that area.
Dolores, you talked a little bit about the barriers that some of our individual community members experience in trying to reach a higher level of self-fulfillment. As an organization, I know that I have seen HAPO out there doing lots of things in the community. Can you tell us a little bit more, number one, about your organizational culture, what drives you guys to be so active in the community, and then how does that show up? What could we see when we're looking out at the community? What is HAPO doing to help us get over that hump?
Well, I thought about this more through the lens of our people that work here. And so I do believe our culture is everything, and our people are our culture. So it's really important that it shows up in everything we do, at least we hope it does, And it's how we treat each other. It's how we talk to each other. It's not an expected behavior or an intended behavior to just check a box. We believe in giving back to our communities in which we, through volunteerism, when we can monetarily, through financial, like we said, financial education. But it starts, our culture is really about creating a sense of belonging, and it starts at the top, but it has to be present everywhere. So I think it has to be authentic and genuine. The essence of belonging has to be apparent from the day you start employment here. And belonging meaning it doesn't matter, your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, religious beliefs, all of that. So our culture is really one about learning, through learning and growing. I think our philosophy as a credit union movement in general about people helping people, we found that it's just important to ensure that our employees are provided an environment where they can thrive, and that means diversity of thought is really important, and we encourage that. Having a voice, passions for, what are you passionate for? How can we help support that in our community? We do a volunteering program where, the volunteer group of the month, and we give to charities based on what our employees are passionate about as well. But again, I think it's really about, we don't want to be lip service. We show in our action, in what we do. Like you said, we show up, we're in a lot of places. But it's more listening to what is the need in our community too, I think is really important. But making sure that our employees are engaged in that and they believe in that as well. And you do that through, again, a sense of belonging from day one here. When we were asked, do you have a formal DEI program? We do a lot of things that fall under the umbrella, but it's really about, we are people helping people. We all have voices, we all matter. And so we want you to feel that way here at work. It's just very important. And it exudes out to our communities when we're out there volunteering too. So it's not complicated. It's really not. But again, it's just being aware. Also, to Junice's point, while we all talk about it, we think everybody knows what that means. You always have to be conversational about diversity and inclusion and what that looks like. But it starts with us about belonging. It's about belonging. So.
Thank you, Dolores. Pam, do you want to tackle that question? How does organizational culture show up at NewEdge?
So I have learned over time, kind of the hard way, that culture is actually a leader's best management tool.
Okay.
When you understand the culture that you're looking for and you set that tone, and then you're constantly reinforcing it, that is your best guide, because that is what norms behavior, guides behavior on a day-to-day basis, behaviors you don't see. The behaviors that end up really hurting people are oftentimes hidden in an organization. Criticism or harsh tones or exclusion or just treating people differently. Those are the things that really hurt. So, and leaders oftentimes don't have awareness of those. So I find setting the culture and really deeply living it is critical. So a couple of years ago, several years ago, we've got very crisp about it. We have something called the climate document. Each letter it's an acronym, so for continuous improvement and so forth. But a few of the letters are really important. I is for individuality, T is for trust, and the C at the beginning is for about continuous improvement. And so when you have continuous improvement, you have trust, and you have individuality, you start to create an environment where there's more candor, because we can have an exclusion. We could have an exclusive culture because we don't want to work with certain types of people. And we can't afford to do that. We're an innovation company. We need diversity of thought. We need thought flowing, and we can't have, poor attitudes or anything else stopping that. But I do believe that those are learned skills. And so we have a culture moment every week. We take one of those letters of the word climate. We do it every month. And then we have a few extra fun months thrown in there for other activities. And we have a month just on Strengthsfinder, which is helping you understand your own strengths and your balconies, your basements, those kinds of things. So we have our staff do the culture moments. So everybody gets to participate, but it is in front of us all the time. It's also part of our 360-degree evaluations, is we evaluate and help each other see blind spots in areas against those elements of culture. So I do believe that that's our best bet, and it covers every aspect of diversity and inclusion, because truthfully, it's hard to have certain kinds of conversations with people about work, about personal things, whatever it is. And I believe that as leaders, we need to be giving people the training to have those conversations. Candor is not the strong point of the Pacific Northwest. I come from upstate New York. Trust me, it's different. And candor is a really important part of diversity and inclusion. I think sometimes people think keeping their mouths shut is the way to get to diversity and inclusion. Whereas I think openness and understanding and empathy is the way to really be inclusive, not just with lip service. So we're trying to work on trainings and practice and ways where we can build our muscles around trust and candor. And I think those are really critical parts to living with people that are different, because if I understand you, probably going to have more compassion.
I love that idea about trust. How about you, Junice? What does your organizational culture look like?
Sure. So, and exactly like Pam was talking about, it's something that you have to reinforce, right? I think oftentimes you come up with whether it's a vision or values, we've all heard of mission statements and culture, and it ends up in a plaque on a wall somewhere. And really, what I went through this years ago with Carbitex, it was really understanding that the core of the company isn't aspirational. It's who was I at the time, right? Which ended up being a much harder exercise than just figuring out what values I'd like to kind of see. But as an organization continued to grow, we look at the principles in which drive our actions, and that's what we refer to when we say values. And then how we treat each other and anybody who interacts with the company, that's how we kind of define our culture. And so through some of this, a few of them are, say, vulnerability on our value side of things, right? Because as an innovation, in a material development, advanced material company, if we're doing something new, by definition, it's risky, and by definition, we're going to fail. And if we can't embrace that, right, we're setting ourselves up for failure. And this idea of relentless optimism and exceeding expectations, but then on how we deal with each other, it's curiosity for us. So it's asking why and why not, but from a place of empathy, respect, and trust. And each of those words can mean different things to different people. So we've gone and defined what that means in relation to Carbitex. So as we continue to grow and as we hire, this is our filter for hiring people, in addition to their skill set, right? Because I think oftentimes there's some of this that can be bolstered and grown, but sometimes this is just really what's core to the organization, and sometimes people have to just have these kind of values. But also, as our organization grows and things change and modify, people are able to understand how we're viewing interactions, how we're viewing our work style, et cetera, based on this culture. And even though we don't have something that specifically says diversity, what I realized that if you look through all of the 4 areas of culture and the 4 areas of our values, if you are not a proponent for diversity or inclusion, then you are against our values and our culture. So it's just baked into the entire system, I would say.
So let's explore that a little bit, Junice. How do you get started on that? I know you're an entrepreneur. Pam, you're an entrepreneur. Dolores, you've worked your way up through many years of service at the credit union. How would you advise a new company coming into this work? How would you advise them to infuse this level of cultural competency within their organization?
Pam, you're probably the best person to talk about that.
I think that's cheating. It was cheating. Okay. Well, I've done it wrong so many years that I think I might have figured out something that's working a lot better. I didn't value culture. I'm a very driven, outcome-oriented person. And I was like, man, that ought to inspire all the right behaviors, right? If we're all working towards the same vision, we all ought to be, if we're aligned around the vision, we'll all behave well to get there. Well, that wasn't true. So step back, look, develop this culture statement. So I think the very first thing is, from the founder's perspective, understanding that it can evolve over time as your organization evolves. So you don't have to get it perfect. But I do think the founder needs to put down their core values. And, again, I think looking at what is going to drive growth and what's going to inhibit it. So a value around continuous improvement for us is critical. Personal leadership, that every person is accountable and is a leader. So I can go through all of them, but, getting that statement down is, I think, the first thing. The second thing, and Junice, you've already said it, is like it can't hang on a wall. So I found, like, we have an all company meeting once a week, and I found that having a culture moment every single week where we're touching one of the letters and people are coming up with themselves. They're like, hey, I found this cool framework online, or I found this cool question, and we're going to have a discussion. And they're like 10 minutes, right? So 10 minutes every single week, we're talking about the culture and reinforcing it. And then we have, culture fun moments too, like parties once every quarter and things like that. But I think getting clear on the culture you want, reinforcing it. And then I do think, they say you get what you measure, right? So a lot of times we feel like, well, you can't measure those things. Well, you can in a 360, and people are pretty good about saying, yeah, I think you're really strong here. Keep doing that, but here's some areas where you could grow. So great direction. And I love what Junice, you said about vulnerability. I think you just can't underemphasize the importance of vulnerability. And I'd love to learn from you, Junice, more about how you're doing that. But that's a big part of our trust is, how are we vulnerable with each other? And we had somebody in one of our culture moments, they just got online, they turned off their camera and they said, basically, I've been really difficult lately. I've been in kind of a bad place. I haven't had a service mentality. And like, they apologize. I mean, we're all just like starting to tear up because they were doing the letter T for trust. It's like, I need you guys to trust me. I haven't been handling things well. And that level of vulnerability, you see that a few times, and it really causes you to respond well. I read something by Brené Brown once that she said that, if you ask people what they're most scared of, they'll say things like public speaking, talking about, intimacy with their partner or whatever it is, right? There's a bunch of things people are scared of doing. And then she said, she did a separate study and she showed that when somebody saw somebody doing that, everybody believed that person was brave. So when we are vulnerable, we show our courage. And I think helping people understand that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's actually courageous. It's really very powerful. So I don't know, Janice, how do you build vulnerability in your organization? I need to learn more.
Yeah, so this is something that we have actually just decided that it's been something that, again, like you said earlier on, it's it's like the founder's values, and for sure, like empathy and vulnerability are two things that I for sure learned from my mom. But what we do is admit when we're wrong, right? So, and that starts with the leaders in the company doing it, because if we say we want people to do it, but don't raise our hand in a meeting and say, hey, guys, what we talked about last week that relates to this during this meeting, like I made a mistake on this, and we move on. And like, I think oftentimes people over value their ego in this realm, and think they'll be judged by being wrong. But the reality is everybody is wrong and needs help in certain times. And I think this is just something that evolves more and more over time, and it's something that I think vulnerability is one of those like superpowers that just takes some practice. But again, it's just an overtime thing. There's no there's no secret, I would say. But again, having other of your values and things that you value in your culture that support vulnerability, like empathy, like T for trust, as you said, Pam, and respect. Then if anybody is disrespecting somebody for being vulnerable, it becomes you can talk through it via the other parts of our culture, right? Like, hey, kind of reacted to this person when they were being vulnerable. Like, if you were empathetic, it would mean kind of X, Y, and Z. And, we really need to trust each other. And the only way we can trust each other, we can be vulnerable. So they all kind of bounce back and forth off each other. So don't have a specific methodology apart from just consistency.
I think too, as a leader, you have to be what you want to see. And like you said, I think trust is a huge piece. And we've learned this in serving, like I was talking about, serving the underserved. They have to trust you, and you have to do what do what you say and say what you do, and be consistent. And also, I like, Junice, to your point too, I think sometimes ego driven, but also underestimating as a leader that your influence piece too, and people are watching you. And they see you, they hear every word you say. And I know for us, I communicate probably over communicate if that's possible, but through a weekly email I send every week to the organization, every single week. I haven't missed one since I started in this position, but we talk about a plethora of subjects, and it's not just business, it's about life. It's about being respectful of each other in this atmosphere that we're living in right now, in this, the world we're in. And there's been a lot of hard things that have happened in the last couple of years that have come to, a lot of these conversations have come to light. And so you can't hide from it. You don't hide from it. You're just being as transparent as you can as a leader. And I think also to your point about being vulnerable is sharing personal insight. Because, and like you said, there's not a perfect person, and including, and it starts right here. You have to admit your imperfections and give grace to people when they mess up, and forgive and move forward. So, but trust is huge.
Dolores, you have a little bit bigger organization than Pam and Junice. How is it possible that you're able to reach that level of trust having so many employees?
Yeah, that is difficult. And add COVID to it, where you can't go and talk to, you can't have personal interactions like you used to. So again, my spin on it has been to stay connected through communication often. I don't get forgotten in the background, but always being in the forefront by communicating. Also your leadership team, our leadership team, our managers are, we lead with integrity and, honesty and humility in leadership. We really believe in that. So I think that has to really be apparent, but communication, always having a consistent message. Like I said, you have to be what you want to see, because everybody's watching. And so it starts with you, and again, and having the right people. And you know what, when you don't, those people stick out. And then like to Pam's point, you have to have hard conversations sometimes, because it's not okay. And especially when you're trying to create an inclusive work environment. And I like also, Pam, what you said about sometimes it's just your tone, it's the candor that goes on. And we think is a lot of times the leader doesn't know. At my desk, sometimes I hear things and I'm like, off-brand, like that's not who we are, and so you just sometimes have to go back to the basics, and just remind people, who are we, what are we about, and why, what is our purpose. I think that's really important.
Pam, you mentioned earlier that you've made some mistakes along the way in this cultural journey. I think we all have. What words of wisdom can you give those of us that are starting out and trying to avoid some of those landmines?
I don't think I tend to be very transparent and tend to be fairly vulnerable and quick to admit my mistakes. And so I felt like leading by example was sufficient. But I found that wasn't sufficient and I also tend to empower a lot of people. So I give people a lot of responsibility, but I tended to give people responsibility ahead of when they were ready for it in terms of leadership. And so that's the way in which I made mistakes, because I didn't set a clear enough message about what was the culture. I mean, in a more, not dictatorial, that sounds terrible, but in a more firm way, like this is where we're going. This is, really leading and stating it like this is the culture we're going to create. But I think the other thing I didn't realize was the extent to which, just because we may be all desiring to go in that direction, we all come from very different backgrounds, and we don't all have the same kind of skills for negotiating conflict, for example, or for working through things. And, my teams work fast and furiously and very tightly, and we need that diversity of thought. But, in those environments, and we're working for Fortune 500s, there's a lot of pressure, right? And so when people are under pressure, the last thing they want to do is just to say, hey, when you do this, it kind of affects me in this way, and maybe we can find a better way to do it, just working through some of those things. So I found that just actually teaching people, but maybe they didn't learn at home, what I didn't learn at home for sure. Teaching people, skill sets, like how to have difficult conversations, or when you give feedback, give concrete examples, or ask questions, listen. I mean, all of those skill sets that truthfully, I am still on a journey to learn myself. I think we just underestimate, like we set the values and we underestimate that there's actually a pretty significant learning curve. And so we invest enormously, really disproportionately for our size in training. We have several academies, and one of our academies that we're launching soon is a professional skills academy, and it's all around this. We've been handling it up to date through our culture moments of just, learning tools for talking to people. And I really believe that that's it. It's a lot about, those things solve for the issues that tend to come up through, diversity and inclusion. And when we are working with people that are different from ourselves and we find great ways of working with them, all of those other predispositions can, melt away. So I'm very passionate about really truly leading, not just by example, but, setting the tone. Dolores, to your point, making it part of the brand, like this is the brand, we will live to the brand. And then just empowering people, because you know what? They take that into their personal lives. They will have better relationships with their significant others. They will have better relationships with their children. They'll guide their children better if they have those kinds of, I call it like conflict resolution, but it's really more just like candor and vulnerability type skill sets.
Thank you, Pam. Dolores or Junice, does your organization offer any special trainings to help us become better leaders and understand how to infuse that level of trust within our employees so that they can be vulnerable? How to have those honest conversations, those difficult conversations?
I can quickly go first. But Dolores, I completely agree with you and what you said earlier around, you can, like, if the culture is at a certain point, you can feel if somebody's, not the right fit, right? And it also doesn't mean that they're a bad person, right? But sometimes maybe it does. But like, like you get it, if you get it done right, and over time, then that is like, you can almost feel the culture, right? Or you can feel the disconnect at points in times. But in terms, sorry, Carol, your question again.
Trainings? The trainings or policies?
Right. So the short answer is no. We're about 60 people here. It's interesting. We have manufacturing, right, and manufacturing labor all the way up to, people who've been, president of Adidas North America at one point in time, right? So we have a really diverse range of people from every definition of diversity. But again, it's like how we bring people on board, it's like hire slow, fire fast kind of thought process, right? So do people really embody our culture? Like what can we do up front to really, and as we grow, I think we, at our company events, kind of like what Pam was saying, right? Like we work to reinforce it at those moments versus having something specifically, kind of parsed out to reinforce it, because then it feels just more natural. So for example, we have like a leadership offsite this weekend, and because we have some new people who are on board in that realm, like we're going to probably do charades where, the 7 things are all the things that are important to us, right? And you kind of have to, but make it fun, right? And don't make it so like sit down and learn this and remember this definition and blah, blah, it's like, because ultimately, if people can't be having fun with what they're doing, number one, why do it? But number two, also, like, I feel like people just tend not to, it doesn't become as sticky, memorable.
So not a strict training regimen, more of a fun charade type of opportunity, right?
Yeah, I think it has to be built in, right? So that might not be the same thing that we do at a company meeting, right? So we have a company meeting later today. And, a lot of people have never seen some of the original images of what it took to get to where we are today, right? So I'll review some of that and talk through that the lens of, again, like our values as a company and what we value as a culture, how we define our culture, and not do an entire recap at every point in time. But, like Pam was saying earlier, it's like, you pick something for the week or something for the meeting and just use those opportunities. And it could just be like a 10-second reminder in the beginning of a meeting too, right? It doesn't have to be something that's maybe overly planned.
Well, we have an internal program that we've created. We call it our Business Essentials and Leadership Development. And the leadership development piece of it has a problem solving in it, holding people accountable, but being fair, empathy, and that kind of. Now, we don't have a perfect process. We're all humans, like we've said before, but we do talk about how a lot of times a problem that's presented to you or a situation that might seem hard is like a little gift with the bow that you learn something from each time, right? So you give them the basics on we deal with members that come in, and there's a lot of not just your employee peer, a lot more intimately than a member coming in that's hot or upset with you because something happened, right? So we talk a lot about empathy and how do you show empathy and diffuse a situation. So we do have a formalized program, but it's definitely it's a, like to Junas's point too, like you got to have fun in it too. It's not all serious stuff, and sometimes you got to laugh at yourself and whatnot. But so yeah, we have somewhat of a formal program, but we also just talk about what went wrong and how can we make it better next time. And also we believe a lot about when people have conflict at work, and for all different reasons, that we come together. Like we don't sometimes have a mediator, but you come together, you talk about it. Sometimes a hard conversation, it's hard to have a hard conversation, but it's so much better on the other side of it when it's done. And so you encourage that. And again, part of that, a lot of that is the empathy piece, the sympathy piece, the putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, which is diversity inclusion, trying to understand where somebody else is coming from. You're not always right. I hate to say it.
I've heard all of you talk about company culture, and it kind of starts with the culture of the company and then obtaining those employees that have those values. How do you assess for that? How do you hire people that have the values that your company embraces? Pam, let's start with you on that question.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure it out. I really am. I'd love to hear from Junas and Dolores. I know what we're doing at present. We have used things like Strengthsfinder, which tells me a lot about work styles. So that can kind of flag, it's a Gallup product, and we'll pay for it for every applicant, even all the interns, just because I think it's a value to them too, to know themselves. So that's been really good. And it doesn't have any kind of prejudice or anything. So there's nothing that would, so it's a great tool. That sometimes can flag issues, but I think that there's a lot more that's going on in terms of personal values. And we actually are looking at a couple services right now that we're looking at hiring to, that will give applicants a lot of different types of, assessment type things. And so I literally have to go take a bunch of assessments right after this to figure out, what I think about this service. So I don't know, Junas and Dolores, how are you guys doing your hiring to try to find people that fit the culture?
Well, I know for us, it starts on our website. We have as far as diversity inclusion, we have our diversity statement right there, bold. And then we also, like, if you go a little further in our website, we have a bulleted list of things that if you come here, you're going to obviously, individuality means a lot, is a bullet of what we respect and honor. Diversity, inclusion, hardworking, dependable, reliable, all the things that, core things that we expect from our employees. And then in the interview process, I'll be honest, sometimes it's hard. When you're interviewing, you're selling your best self. And so sometimes we remind our employees, but remember when you sold yourself. And this was what it was going to be. And we were, our expectations are made clear in our interview as well. But again, the real proof is the person when they're actually in your culture and working. And, again, like to Pam's point, I don't think there's a perfect way, but having good conversation, I think, and not formalizing everything we do. It's just, we're people running this organization. We're people helping people. And so we really talk a lot about that and about a lot of people, you're a bank, you're a credit union, you're financial services. How can that be? It's work, but no, you belong to something, like, creating something you belong to, that you're loyal to, that mirrors your same values as a person. We just talk a lot about our personality as an organization. And it's not just, we're going to teach you the work. We're going to teach you how to do the thing if you maybe don't have that skill set coming in. But these are the things that we probably can't teach you, but we're going to try to instill in you. But these are our expectations of behavior and how we talk to each other and treat each other. So we try to do that. And we hire a lot. Right now, the world we're in, hard to find people as well. And so we don't just hire somebody to fill a role, to fill the slot. we want to make sure that that person understands this organization, coming in. So we try really hard through communication and articulating who we are.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like Pam said earlier, I can totally relate in terms of, I've made and continue to make mistakes, and hopefully less frequently. But skills can be taught. Values and culture we're just not willing to teach those, to be honest, right? So because we feel like those are soft skills that people have or they don't have. And again, it doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means they're not the right fit for our organization, right? And so we just try to bake in questions to the process. And we're actually going through a revamp of this right now to determine how are we able to like cross-check by a couple different interviewers, asking similar questions, asking the same question in a couple different ways that really ping, the 8 things that really matter to us that we know we can't teach. That's at least the idea. In practice, obviously there's a subjective nature to it, but we're really trying to hone that because, again, it's not just saying, okay, is this person trustworthy? What does trust mean for us? And we have that defined, right? So it's not just because, like I say, the definition of the word, or the word run, has like 50 definitions to itself, right? So like if you don't know which definition you are, like I might say, hey, I'm running to the store, and somebody's like, oh, well, he's just going to hop in his car and go to the store, or I actually might be running to the store, right? Depends on the context and the person. And that's just a silly example of like how many people have a different definition or putting into practice the word trust or curiosity or respect. So yeah, it's just something that we hope to continue to get better at, but we try to figure out how to suss those values and that kind of those cultural elements out in the beginning. And again, for us, it's a bit of it's challenging when you have such a wide range of skill sets and backgrounds. But that's also, I guess, what makes it pretty fun as we continue to grow and to have an organization that's cohesive across, manufacturing to engineering to business development and marketing.
I think another thing too that's interesting nowadays is retention. How do you get your people to stay? And so we put a lot of effort in hiring and whatnot, but also the existing culture, and we have a lot of from age, gender, longevity in this organization. We have a 45-year employee to somebody that just started literally today. And so you have this wide gamut, but we can't forget about our existing staff. And so that's where the culture, they are our culture. So you got to always, the communication of who you are, what you are, and reminder all the time, it's at the forefront of everything we do, the decisions we make. We always say we make business decisions that make sense, obviously, but we have a human element to how we aren't a black and white. We don't do black and white. We really do gray because they're so situational things. So anyways, I think the retention piece, the hiring is important, but the people that work for you existing, like, we have to uplift and pay attention. It's really important.
And I think, kind of I think I'm hearing like, it's like, you can't do diversity, you can't do inclusion, right? Like, what are the values that you have that support diversity and inclusion? And I think that's like a really interesting concept.
Yeah.
It looks like we are running out of time. I was just wondering if you guys had any other last minute thoughts about your role as the CEO and infusing the kind of corporate culture that embraces the values of diversity, equity, inclusion. I know we can't bake it in necessarily to our employees, but you can create the environment. Was there any other thoughts you guys might have or words of wisdom to our audience?
I think for me, it might just be that when you take a strong leadership perspective and you really decide that it's on you to drive that culture, and not obviously it's not just you because you're going to engage people, but it's on you to set that tone, that you're impacting the lives not only of those 20 people, but you're impacting the lives of the other 100 people that either are supported by them or interacting with them in all the other environments that they're interacting with. And so I believe that employers have both the right, the responsibility, and the privilege of impacting our communities. And I think we have to take seriously that something like 80% of employees aren't pleased with the leadership in their companies. They don't feel like there's good leadership. And okay, let's knock it down to maybe 50% is true, but there's something going on here that we need good leaders. I'm delighted to just get to be in a group with Junice and Dolores, who I know to be good leaders, and I'm going to be pinging you guys later for some of your tricks. But it's just, we need more good leadership, because I believe that employers have a massive responsibility to turn the tide and help human beings be more human.
Thank you, Pam.
I agree. Yeah, I was going to thank you guys too for allowing me to be part of this panel, and have a lot of respect, Junice, Pam, and so I'm thankful for that. And also what you just said, a privilege, but what an honor it is to be influential in people's lives, and understanding the responsibility you have in that when you're running an organization. And so I'm just really thankful that I've been afforded the opportunity, and I don't take it lightly. And I hope I do what you say, Pam, and set the tone and do the right thing by my employees, and all of, like you said, it's a trickle down effect. When you come to work and you feel listened to and important, and you have a voice, and that you matter and you belong, it exudes to your personal life too. And so, and you really hope, really it starts in your personal life and comes into the, everybody affects it. So anyways, I'm just really honored. So thank you for having me today.
I agree. I'll just echo, what Dolores and Pam said, and around, the fact that businesses have a network effect. It's not just your employees, it's your employees' families. And one thing I might just quickly add is, I think we become what we tolerate as well. And so sometimes it's hard to make organizational changes, because I don't think there's anybody there aren't many people, put it that way, they're truly bad or evil, right? So you have, a mix of positive and, maybe negative kind of, and it's just really figuring out what really aligns, because if you have an organization and people in it that don't align with your culture and your values, then you're reducing the network effect of that your organization has, and you're telling everybody else in the organization that you tolerate whatever it is that you're putting up with. And so there's that other part of it too that I would just add, in addition to, I think, again, the comments that Dolores and Pam made, that I definitely align with as well.
Well, you guys have been great. It's been a great discussion that we've had this morning. I've learned so much. It's been really encouraging. I'm going out of my executive director position. I'm retiring at the end of the year. So I wish I would have known all of this when I started, but I just wanted to thank you, Dolores and Junice and Pam, for being willing to share some of your wisdom and insights with us today.
Thank you. Thanks, Carol.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Carol, you did a phenomenal job of moderating this, so thank you so much. And Junice and Dolores and Pam, as a community, we're just really lucky to have all of you leading the organizations. I've learned a lot today, and I'm sure others that watched did as well. I have the opportunity to know you all, and some of you better than others, but you're all just very, very transparent and very approachable people. And so thanks so much for just having such a real down-to-earth conversation today. It was really extraordinary. So thanks so much. The Tri-Cities Diversity Summit concludes tomorrow. Join us at noon for the keynote presentation, Inclusive Communities Win. Keynote speaker Kuma Roberts will give you 5 quick wins to supercharge your business strategy for inclusion. Kuma is a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant with over 10 years of organizational development. Also, we're going to honor the recipients of the 2021 Tri-Cities Champion of Diversity Awards. You won't want to miss this. So please, if you're not already registered, you can register at the link in the Zoom Q&A tab. All sessions from the Tri-Cities Diversity Summit will be posted on the Chamber's YouTube channel, Facebook page, and website at tricityregionalchamber.com. We'll also email the links out to all of today's attendees, and please feel free to share the videos with your friends, family, and colleagues. Thanks again to all of our sponsors. This event wouldn't be possible without your support. Our premier sponsor, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, gold sponsors, Greater Columbia Accountable Community of Health and HAPO Community Credit Union, silver sponsors, Christensen Inc., Columbia Basin College, Energy Northwest, HPM Corporation, and Cadleck. And our bronze sponsors, Bechtel National Inc., BNSF Railway, Carbitex, Redder & Company, Sotheby's International Realty, and Washington State University Tri-Cities. Thank you for joining us today. I hope that you'll join us tomorrow for the conclusion of the 2021 Tri-Cities Diversity Summit. Take care.